Racist police throws garbage at black man without knowing he is his new boss. Before we start this exciting story, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any content like this. Also, comment from which city you are watching. Your interaction helps the channel a lot. On a sunny and busy afternoon in the city center, a black man with a calm and elegant posture walks with firm steps through the streets. He is dressed impeccably, conveying an aura of serenity and confidence, as if he carries with him a great life experience. Apparently, he's someone new to the neighborhood, but at the same time he seems to already know how to deal with life's challenges. He observes the environment around him with a curious expression, but nothing in it betrays exactly what is about to happen. Suddenly he turns a corner and comes across a distinct figure, a uniformed police officer with an imposing posture who looks at the man from top to bottom with an expression of disdain. This police officer is known for his aggressive and authoritarian behavior, especially towards those he considers to be inferior. His gaze is cold and calculating, making it clear that he does not sympathize with people like the man he has just seen. The man notices the hostile stance, but maintains his serenity, just watching the police officer approach with quick and intentional steps. Without giving the man a chance to even introduce himself, the police officer begins an arrogant interrogation. In a harsh tone, he asks questions without the slightest courtesy, as if he were facing a suspect or someone who shouldn't be there. His words are direct and full of prejudice, but the man remains calm, responding only as necessary and maintaining his composure. This seems to irritate the police officer even more, who decides to intensify the humiliation. In an act of pure contempt, the police officer turns to a nearby dumpster, removes a bag of trash, and without hesitation throws the contents at the man's feet. Food debris and dirt scatter across the floor, splashing his impeccable shoes. The scene is shocking for those passing by on the street. Some people stop to observe, others move away, afraid to intervene. The police officer, satisfied with his lesson, crosses his arms and displays a satisfied smile, believing that he has imposed his dominance over the man. The man looks at the ground, taking a deep breath. He observes the rubbish spread at his feet, without showing any reaction of anger or revolt. Instead, he looks up and stares at the police officer with impressive calm, as if he were dealing with a situation that in some way he already anticipated. Without saying a word, he avoids the trash with firm steps and continues on his way, leaving the policeman behind without giving him the satisfaction of an answer. As he walks away, the viewer is left with a sense of curiosity and outrage. Who really is this man? Why did he react so calmly? The scene provokes a series of questions, but one thing is certain. This story is just beginning, and the outcome will be something no one expects. In that city, social tensions are disguised by a facade of modernity and progress, but for those who know the corridors of power, it is clear that not everything is as inclusive as it seems. Despite the equality policies that spread in public speeches, discrimination and prejudices persist, hidden under fake smiles and formal greetings. In this environment, the racist police officer has acted for years as an authoritarian and feared figure, especially in areas where he believes people don't belong. His presence is felt and often avoided by those aware of his reputation. The black man, who suffered the prejudice attack by the police officer, has a very different origin from the image that the police officer projects about him. Behind the scenes in the corporate world, he is known as a brilliant manager with strategic vision. With a respected reputation across multiple industries, he was recently appointed to lead a major reorganization of the public safety sector. Its mission, although not yet disclosed to the public, involves evaluating staff, detecting cases of misconduct, and implementing policies that promote true inclusion and fairness. This new position was given to him after a journey of personal and professional challenges. Son of a humble family, he faced many obstacles before achieving success. From a young age, he learned the importance of remaining calm in difficult times and, above all, to never let prejudice define who he is. Instead, he used each barrier as fuel for his achievements. Now, with a position of power and respect, he aims to make a difference, so that others don't have to go through what he faced. However, the police officer in question has no idea who he really is. For him, the man he encountered on the streets was just another threat to the status quo he tries to maintain, a person he believed he could humiliate without consequences. The police officer, with years of service, maintains a routine where he turns a blind eye to those he considers to be in his circle, but acts with brutality and disdain towards anyone who, in his view, shouldn't be there. For him, power and respect are guaranteed by force and intimidation, and he uses both without remorse. Police work relationships are fueled by a culture of superficial companionship. His colleagues are aware of his aggressive stance, but few dare to question him openly. After all, he learned to game the system, always staying one step ahead of any accusations. In his circle, he is seen as someone who does the dirty work that many prefer to avoid, but that facade is about to be broken. As the black man continues his way through the streets, he reflects on the incident. The officer's attack is not new to him. He has faced this type of situation several times, but now he has the means to respond forcefully. He knows the protocols, the limits of the law, and the loopholes that individuals like the police officer exploit. The episode only strengthens their resolve to completely overhaul the system and implement real change. With a meticulous approach, he is determined to expose the abusive and prejudiced practices that persist within the system. He sees the episode not just as a personal affront, but as an opportunity to exemplify the urgency of structural reform. For him, this incident will be one of the first proofs of the need for his new role. However, he prefers to tread carefully, ensuring that his actions are fair and that every detail is in line with the protocols he himself helped establish. The story gains momentum as it becomes clear that man is not just a passive observer. It represents an imminent change, a silent power that has been placed exactly where justice and reform are most needed. His presence brings an invisible tension that threatens the status quo, but he prefers to let the situation mature, knowing that he will soon be able to act decisively and ruthlessly. The climate of tension continues to spread throughout the city. The police officer, without imagining what is to come, acts as always, exercising his authority in an abusive way, intimidating and humiliating people he considers inferior. He sees himself as an untouchable figure, especially in a system that until then always seemed to protect his excesses. For him, the idea that anyone would confront him directly is unthinkable. After all, he believes his methods are effective and even necessary to maintain order. However, this false sense of security leaves you increasingly inattentive and vulnerable. Meanwhile, the black man who suffered the prejudiced attack begins to move the pieces in his own strategy. Anonymously, he collects information about the police officer and other similar incidents that occurred in the city. It brings together testimonies, security camera images, and reports from victims. Every detail is carefully documented, preparing for an action that will not only confront the officer, but also expose the entire system that allowed such abuses to occur for so long. In parallel, he begins to meet with other members of the city's top administration, forming discreet alliances. His approach is silent but firm, choosing strategic people to create a support network in his mission. Each conversation brings to light the need for profound reform, and he exposes the urgency of taking decisive action against abuses of power. Some of these administrators are shocked by what they hear, while others seem afraid, but his calm and confidence are contagious, and he little by little begins to gain the support he needs to act. The police officer, on the other hand, continues his aggressive routine without imagining that his behavior is about to be examined. He continues to ignore subtle signs and messages that something has changed, including small changes in the attitude of some of his colleagues who already suspect the movement. Sometimes he notices stares and whispers in the department, but dismisses it as just jealousy. His confidence blinds him to imminent risks, and this inattention ends up creating the ideal environment for the black man to implement his plan without being detected. As the black man progresses with his investigation, other cases of abuse also emerge, each worse than the last. He uncovers reports of citizens being silenced, records manipulated, and evidence missing, all in an effort to protect the reputations of individuals like the police officer. Systematic injustice motivates him even more, knowing that his mission now expands into something greater. The objective is not just to confront the police officer, but to use this case as a symbol of a broad and significant transformation. Through his network of allies, he gains access to restricted files and discovers that the police officer, in addition to everyday abuses, was involved in serious cases of corruption. Discovering this only intensifies his determination, as he knows that he now has on his hands not only a case of abuse of power, but also a series of evidence that could trigger an in-depth investigation. He understands that the path he has chosen is not easy, and that he will face opposition, but he is prepared to face any obstacle to end impunity. In the midst of these discoveries, the black man organizes a confidential meeting with some influential members of the Public Security Department. At this meeting, he presents all the evidence gathered, detailing the officer's transgressions and the way he abused his power. His tone is serious and direct, making it clear that the only way to restore public trust is to take exemplary action. Those present, many of whom have their own concerns about the police officer's abuse, begin to realize the gravity of the situation and the importance of supporting this initiative. The police officer, however, continues to act as if he were untouchable, expanding his circle of victims without knowing that every day he is closer to facing the consequences. He believes that because he is a well-known and feared figure, his actions will go unnoticed, but the truth is that his behavior has already become unsustainable for many. His interactions with the population are becoming increasingly tense, and even colleagues in the department begin to avoid associating with him, fearing the repercussions of his actions. For the black man, each new piece of information obtained reinforces the final plan. Your determination is to remain calm and wait for the right moment to act, ensuring that each piece is in place before revealing its position. He knows that for the impact to be complete, he needs to act in a way that does not allow the officer or the system to get away with it. This moment of waiting only increases the expectation and tension, both for him and for those who are aware of what is to come. It represents not only individual retaliation, but also the hope of justice for all who have been oppressed and silenced for so long. The entire city seems suspended, about to witness a historic upheaval. As the central conflict intensifies, compelling subplots begin to unfold, adding new layers to the narrative. Other victims of the police officer's abuse emerge and, encouraged by the black man's discreet movement, find the courage to recount their experiences. These accounts not only strengthen the case, but also reveal a web of interconnected injustices where many have suffered in silence. Each new statement reveals details that connect the officer to increasingly shady practices and a system that has repeatedly protected him. With the emergence of these new voices, black men recognize that their struggle is no longer just personal. He now sees himself as a mobilizing force, representing a greater cause. In secret conversations, he meets with these people, sharing what he can about his own plan without revealing all the details. These interactions are full of emotion, as people share their stories and sympathize with their courage, fueling a feeling of hope. He realizes that by taking down the police officer, he can also dismantle a deep-rooted culture of impunity. Meanwhile, the police officer begins to notice some changes in the atmosphere around him. Colleagues who once feared him now avoid him, and whispers in the police station corridors seem to increase. He feels the climate changing, but he doesn't fully understand what's happening. This new tension makes him more aggressive and paranoid, believing that his authority is being questioned. This feeling of insecurity leads him to make mistakes, leaving gaps that make the black man's job easier. The pressure grows as the days go by, and the community itself begins to question the police officer's behavior. People who have always seen him as a feared figure begin to see him differently, and rumors about his abusive behavior spread. This scenario creates an invisible pressure on him, intensifying the sense of urgency for the black man. He knows that time is crucial and that every move now must be precise. In a final strategy, the black man increases the pressure by discreetly involving public and influential figures in the city. His idea is simple: make it impossible for the system to ignore the problem. He uses the evidence he has accumulated to convince these people to support his cause. Interactions are cautious, but allies understand that what is at stake is much more than a personal dispute. It is the opportunity to reform a structure that has encouraged abuse for too long. Finally, time pressure begins to become more palpable for everyone involved. The black man feels a responsibility to act quickly, knowing that the credibility of the movement he started depends on his ability to deliver on what he promised. The city waits, anxiously and apprehensively, for what is to come, while he defines the last steps before definitive action. Everything culminates in an unexpected situation where the police officer makes the final mistake. Blinded by paranoia and rage, he decides to confront the black man, trying to publicly intimidate him. The tension is palpable. He approaches him in a busy place, trying to humiliate him once again, in front of several witnesses. The police officer, believing he is in control, accuses him of disturbing order, with tones of contempt, throwing racist insinuations that increase the discomfort of those present. However, the black man remains impassive. He allows the police officer to lose himself in his own abuse of power, while the silent audience watches, shocked. The police officer, without realizing the trap that has formed around him, continues with his verbal aggression, believing that he is commanding respect. However, he does not realize that the situation is being recorded. Several people around, outraged by what they saw, decided to record the moment, capturing every abusive word and gesture. Then, the black man finally reveals his first trump card. He looks directly at the police officer and in a calm voice mentions his new position, a position of authority over the attacker himself. The shock is visible on the police officer's face, who is overcome with disbelief and fear. He tries to deflect, to downplay what he just heard, but it's too late now. The videos captured everything, and witnesses already understand the gravity of the situation. This revelation completely transforms the dynamic. The police officer, who previously felt superior, now realizes that his career, and even his freedom, are at risk. He tries to reverse the situation, but every word only worsens his position. The once silent crowd begins to murmur in indignation, and the expressions of those around him reveal that they have lost any trace of respect they had for him. The news spreads quickly. Within hours, social media is ablaze, and the video goes viral. Newspapers and television programs report the incident, and pressure on the system increases, with the public demanding a quick response. The black man watches everything with controlled calm, knowing that his strategy is working. He didn't need to shout or match the police officer's level. The truth, combined with the power of witnesses, speaks for itself. Behind the scenes, the system faces a dilemma. The police officer's behavior is indefensible, but punishing him implies recognizing the larger problem of corruption and abuse of power in the police force. Authorities realize they are at a crossroads. If they try to protect the officer, public outrage could explode further. If they take action, they will need to deal with the institution's damaged reputation. Meanwhile, the police officer sees his life fall apart. His arrogance and racist attitudes, previously hidden by the position he held, are now exposed. He faces an immediate and relentless backlash. Friends and colleagues who once respected him now shun him, and his personal life begins to fall apart. People he interacted with on a daily basis began to view him with contempt and repulsion, and he realized that he was alone. The black man, on the other hand, stands firm. He watches the results of his meticulous planning, knowing that the turning point has masterfully favored him. He recognizes that this moment is not just about him. It is a milestone in the fight for justice, showing that no one is above the consequences of their actions. He moves forward, taking his time, but aware that his every step now has a much greater weight. After the shocking revelation of his true position, the black man observes the immediate consequences of the situation. The cop, now exposed, desperately tries to contain the damage, but realizes he's in a game he never really controlled. The public humiliation and reactions of those around him hit him hard. In the days that follow, the police officer faces a barrage of criticism and demands, both from the media and local authorities, who are now trying to respond to public pressure. The climate in the police department becomes untenable for him. Colleagues who once supported him begin to withdraw, fearing that their proximity to the demoralized officer will affect their own reputations. Each day on the job becomes a reminder of his downfall, and he feels the growing hostility of those who now see him as a threat to the very integrity of the department. The feeling of isolation is overwhelming, and he realizes there is no simple way to escape the consequences of his actions. Meanwhile, the black man receives support and respect from many people who previously ignored him. He realizes the impact his courage and resilience has had on the community. People from different backgrounds and social classes feel inspired by his firm stance in the face of injustice, and he becomes a figure of reference for many who, in silence, also face discrimination and prejudice. The impact of the situation begins to reverberate beyond the borders of that specific place. News of his act of resistance and the public exposure of the racist police officer reaches other cities, sparking a greater debate about prejudice, authority, and responsibility. Activist groups are mobilizing, using what happened as an example of how unity and courage can combat institutional racism and abuse of power. Feeling pressured and unsupported, the officer finally receives formal notice of his suspension. He is informed that his conduct will be subject to a rigorous internal investigation, and that any attempt to reverse this decision will be futile. Heartbroken and remorseful, he begins to realize that he deeply underestimated the black man, and most importantly, he underestimated the power of truth. His arrogance has cost him dearly, and now he finds himself facing an uncertain future where shame and regret outweigh any legal punishment. The black man, on the other hand, continues with his life, maintaining his serene posture. He understands that although he obtained revenge in an honorable way, there is still a long way to go before situations like this stop happening. He leverages the visibility he's gained to make a positive difference, encouraging conversations about equality and respect in his community and beyond. Silently, he prepares for what is to come, knowing that the true impact of his actions goes beyond a single act of revenge. While the internal investigation into the police officer progresses, the black man takes the moment to reflect on everything that happened. Instead of focusing on feelings of anger or revenge, he commits to transforming this experience into a source of learning and personal growth. He knows that the prejudice and abuse of power he faced are not isolated cases, but represent a much larger problem affecting people in diverse communities. Thus, he decides to use his position to inspire and support those who still suffer in silence in similar situations. From then on, he began to get involved in community initiatives that aim to educate the population about their rights and how to report abuses. He speaks at schools, community centers, and local organizations, encouraging open dialogue about respect, equality, and combating prejudice. Its message is clear. Every person has value, and no one should be treated with contempt or injustice because of color, class, or any other factor. Over time, he realizes that his story has inspired others to stand up against prejudice and fight for change. He knows people who, once fearful, now find the strength to report cases of discrimination and abuse they have witnessed or suffered. This support and encouragement helps break down barriers that once seemed insurmountable, uniting the community around a greater cause. At the same time, the suspended police officer goes through a painful journey of self-knowledge. Isolated from his peers and the target of constant criticism, he finally begins to question his own beliefs and attitudes. He finds himself forced to confront the failures that led him to this point, reflecting on the prejudices he has internalized over the years and that have led him to treat people inhumanely. Amidst his loneliness and guilt, he begins to realize that his actions reflect a much deeper problem, not just personal, but social. Over time, he seeks professional help, trying to understand the roots of his behavior. He starts attending support groups and engaging in debates about empathy, diversity, and respect, learning, albeit belatedly, about the devastating effects of prejudice. Although he knows that nothing can erase what he did, he finds in this process a possibility of reconstruction, albeit uncertain, to become a better and more conscious person. As their journey unfolds, the community also experiences a transformation. The case takes on greater proportions, drawing attention to broader issues of prejudice and abuse of power. Local authorities, pressured by the repercussions, are beginning to implement awareness programs and specific training for public agents, seeking to create an environment where respect and empathy are central values. The black man continues to dedicate himself to his cause, seeing how each small victory adds up to a larger movement for justice and equality. He understands that the impact of his experience goes beyond the revenge he initially sought. Now, he feels part of a genuine change that can prevent future abuse and promote a more just society. Instead of feeling like a victim, he sees himself as an agent of transformation, someone who had the courage to face injustice and through this generated change. Tension rises as the investigation reaches its final moments. Evidence gathered over the weeks brings to light a history of troubling incidents involving the officer, revealing a pattern of behavior that had been ignored for years. The community, following the case closely, comes together in support of the black man, eager for justice and a decision that signals real change. The movement is growing, with peaceful protests and campaigns on social media, calling for structural reform and a public commitment to respect and equality for all. At the same time, the black man prepares to confront the police officer in a public hearing that will be decisive for both. He knows that this is the opportunity to bring to light all the pain and injustice he has experienced, but he also understands that he needs to channel his experience into something bigger than himself. He rehearses his statement, looking for the right words to transform his indignation into a powerful and inspiring message. Now his objective is broader. He wants his story to touch everyone so that it serves as a warning and learning experience for society as a whole. Behind the scenes, the police officer lives his own dilemma. He realizes that his career and reputation are hanging in the balance and, for the first time, he seems to truly understand the gravity of his actions. His initial arrogance gives way to increasing nervousness, and he wonders if he will be able to face the consequences of what he has done. He fears public judgment and the exposure of his failures, but at the same time, he feels a pang of remorse as he recognizes the impact of his actions. As the hearing approaches, other police officers and colleagues begin to take their positions. Some defend the police officer, stating that he has always been a dedicated professional, but others share experiences that reflect the same abusive behavior. This internal division within the corporation reinforces the importance of a fair and firm verdict, which represents a new beginning for everyone involved. The night before the hearing, the black man reflects on everything he has been through and the choices he has in front of him. He thinks about how many people supported him, how many stories of discrimination he heard during the process, and realizes that what is at stake is much more than a simple settling of scores. He feels the weight of responsibility in his hands and commits once again to using this opportunity to bring about real change. Finally, the day of the hearing arrives. The room is full, with representatives from the community, the media, and activists who see that moment as a historic chance for change. The black man and the police officer face each other, both aware that this is the turning point. The atmosphere is one of anticipation, and everyone is waiting to see how this story, which began with an act of prejudice, will end, and what impact it will have on everyone who follows it. At the climax of the hearing, the room is heavily silent as the black man stands to give his testimony. He begins to speak with controlled calm, each word loaded with meaning, and recounts the details of his encounter with the police officer, from his initial humiliation to the anger he felt at being treated so unfairly. The room listens in absolute silence as he describes the experience, and it is clear that many there share his outrage. It is not limited to the events of that day, takes the opportunity to address the larger problem of structural racism and abuses of power, revealing that their situation is not an isolated case, but part of a reality faced by many. His words are direct, blunt, and he exposes the pain of a life of prejudice and disrespect that he faced and that he knows others also face on a daily basis. He looks directly at the police officer, making it clear that this hearing is not just about the two of them, but about changing a system that repeatedly fails to protect and respect all citizens. When he finishes his testimony, the room explodes in applause. The impact of his words resonates far and wide, and the police officer seems to collapse in his chair, aware of the weight of responsibility that now falls upon him. He is then asked to give his version of events, but for the first time, he finds himself speechless, shaken by the force of the testimony he has just heard. He tries to justify his actions, but is stopped by harsh stares and the growing pressure of the truth that can no longer be ignored. The black man's lawyer presents irrefutable evidence of the officer's past behavior, revealing a series of complaints and incidents that had been ignored. This is evidence of a pattern, of a culture of abuse that has been hidden for too long. The public, now fully aware of the scope of the police officer's actions, reacts with murmurs of displeasure, realizing the seriousness and depth of the situation. The tension reaches its peak when the verdict is about to be given. The judge of the hearing takes the word, and after a brief deliberation, announces the decision that many expected. The policeman is suspended from his duties and will be led to a disciplinary process, as well as facing more strict sanctions that may permanently affect his career. The black man observes with a mixture of relief and satisfaction, knowing that finally justice was made, and that decision represents a message of hope for all who were one day silenced. The audience ends with the black man coming out under applause of the crowd, who celebrates his courage and resilience. This is a historic moment, and he knows that his struggle and pain were not in vain. When leaving the place, he is surrounded by people who thank him for giving voice to such a deep and rooted problem. He realizes that his act of facing the system has inspired many, and that now there is a real possibility of transformation. After the climax of the audience, the life of the black man begins to follow a new direction. With the public recognition of his courage and the impact of his testimony, he decides to use his position to promote changes that make the work environment more egalitarian and safe for all. Its first measure is to create an agent training program, addressing topics such as respect, diversity, and the damage of prejudice, not just as a formality, but as a genuine commitment to a new culture within the corporation. The decision made at the hearing reverberates throughout the city, and soon more communities begin to discuss and rethink the role of the authorities and the fair treatment to all citizens, regardless of color or class. Other departments follow the example, and there is a real mobilization so that this kind of abuse is never tolerated again. The man realizes that he is finally not alone in this battle, and that the change he was so sought now is taking shape before his eyes. Meanwhile, the policeman faces the consequences of his actions. Without the uniform and far from the privileges of his old position, he becomes the reality of his attitudes and the negative impact he left. In silence, he observes the respect and admiration that his new boss has gained, a position he, with his attitudes, could never achieve. Increasingly isolated, he is forced to reflect on what he has lost, not only his job, but also respect for the community and his own colleagues, who now see the example of a conduct that should not be repeated. The community unites to support Black Man, recognizing his role in bringing a significant change. He gains even more respect and admiration, not only for his position, but for his integrity and courage to face injustice head-on. People now see him not only as a leader, but as a symbol of resistance and transformation, someone who fought for a fairer environment for everyone and won. In the end, he understands that his role goes beyond leading. He pledges to remain vigilant, ensuring that his story serve as a constant reminder that no one should be tried by the color of his skin, and that everyone has the right to be treated with respect and dignity. This commitment becomes his new mission, and he knows that this is just the first victory of many to come. Months after the hearing, the Black Man receives an anonymous letter of thanks from someone he least expected, the policeman himself who had humiliated him. In the letter, the former agent recognizes his mistakes, admitting that the experience forced him to reflect on the consequences of his prejudice. He confesses that, while now facing difficulties, the impact of his attitude taught him a painful but necessary lesson. If you have followed this story here, share your reflections in the comments. We want to know how this journey of transformation and justice has resonated with you. Don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our next stories. If you watched until the end, comment here, "I watched until the end," and take the opportunity to click on the suggested video on the final screen to follow another exciting story full of twists.